We're ready. And it looks like we're ready. Good afternoon and welcome to the Health and Government Operations Committee. We're glad that you could be here with us today. I want to review a few of the rules of our committee. Please do not forward the Zoom link for the hearings. Staff will not allow anyone into who is not invited to testify into the hearing. And I'd ask you to encourage people to watch the hearing on YouTube. In terms of timing for the oral presentations, the bill sponsor or designee is allotted 5 minutes to present the bill. Up to 5 witnesses will each be given 2 minutes to speak each in support of a bill after the sponsor has spoken. We'd ask those witnesses to stay in the hearing until the delegates have had an opportunity to ask questions. Next, up to 5 witnesses will each be allowed to speak for 2 minutes in opposition to the bill, and then please stay in the room to ask to be able to respond to the delegates' questions. Please conclude your remarks when you see the timer finish. Members of the committee must remain present with your video camera on during the entirety of the hearing. Members, I would remind you, please ask only one question of one witness. If you have other questions, you may follow up offline. Please use the raised hand function to indicate that you have a question. And we would let the witnesses know that we allow one response from one witness. And if you need to follow up and provide a delegate with more information, you can follow up offline. So with that, we will get started. We have 10 bills being heard today. The order of the bills are HB 1212, HB 1214, HB 790, HB 722, HB 797, HB 1244, HB 775, HB 660, HB 871, HB 874. With that, we will begin with our first bill of the day, which is House Bill 1212. Delegate Washington brings us Procurement Socially and Economically Disadvantaged Workers Protection Preference. Welcome, Delegate Washington.
Thank you. I'm going to pass it to Alex Hughes.
Okay.
Madam Chair, thank you. Members of the committee. I just want to generally say I'm here on behalf of the Speaker for House Bill 1212 and also House Bill 1214. As I think the committee knows, the Speaker spent 7 months, I think, doing a statewide listening tour, talking to experts nationally, locally, and at a statewide level in crafting her racial and economic justice agenda. And we are incredibly fortunate that Delegates Washington and Wilson have both agreed to sponsor this legislation on behalf of the Speaker's racial and economic justice agenda. These two bills taken together really try to move the ball forward in terms of creating intergenerational wealth for disadvantaged groups. Delegate Washington's bill is modeled after the federal hub zone program that looks to give preference or additional points in the procurement process based on the makeup of your workforce. And Delegate Wilson's bill looks to really beef up the technical assistance abilities of the Governor's Office of Minority Affairs, which has a new name that I never remember, but the Governor's Office of Minority Affairs by putting a liaison in every state agency so that companies really have a point of contact when they are bidding on procurements that can help them through the technical assistance portions when bidding. The Speaker's overall goals really are to ensure that everyone has a seat at the table and that we really give the opportunity for more minority and women-owned businesses to have the opportunity to be prime bidders and get awards on state contracts. So with that, Madam Chair, Delegate Collison, I will turn it over to Delegate Washington.
Thank you, Alex, and thanks for that overview. And I want to just thank the Speaker for her vision and leadership on this issue. For the record, Delegate Alonzo Washington here to present on House Bill 1212, which aims to create opportunities for economically disadvantaged communities who have been historically excluded from wealth creation in our state. Maryland's income inequality remains incredibly problematic and has even gotten worse in recent years. Our Black households' median income currently sits at 71 cents for every $1 of white household income. These gaps can be traced for decades and centuries back to federal, state, and local policies that have explicitly and implicitly excluded people of color from wealth creation opportunities. The state's inability to implement policies that explicitly address these gaps allowed them to grow wider. One important gap that needs to be addressed are disparities in state contracts, in which this bill addresses. These have historically functioned as a wealth building tool for large corporations owned and run predominantly by white men. We cannot allow new industries that are heavily intertwined with government contracts to follow this pattern. While Maryland has made commitments to increase the amount of contracts awarded to minority business enterprises to at least 29% of the total dollar value of all contracts it awards, this goal has never been reached. In 2019, the state's MBE achievement was only at 17.9% of the nearly $8 billion that it awarded over all of its contracts. Clearly, the commitment our state made back in 2013 has not been met almost 8 years later. To address this problem, HB 1212 requires a state, when seeking bids for a contract, to apply a 10% preference to contractors who agree that at least 50% of their workers for that bid will be from socially and economically disadvantaged groups, including people of color and women. Applying a 10% preference to businesses that employ a majority of disadvantaged people will help the state's efforts to increase racial equality and promote economic justice. For these reasons, Madam Chair and members of the committee, I respectfully urge for support for HB 1212. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. I'd like to call Robert Fulton Dashiell.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Since I started work I'm a Baltimore attorney, and since I started work in the area of minority business, which was back during the days, I think it was House Bill 64, which would have been in the mid 70s, I guess. This is HB 1212 presents the first time that I've seen where two very, very important principles are actually married together in a way that makes some sense. The two important principles, the two objectives that the state has been pursuing for a number of years, one is to increase minority business participation, and at the same time, also to increase employment of socially and economically disadvantaged persons. Now, you would think logically, sometime over this past 40 years, somebody would have tied those two together in a way that they could be pursued mutually and at the same time. This bill does it for the first time. Now, maybe it's been done before, but I'm not aware of it. And the sense of it is, we know historically that minority businesses typically employ a greater percentage of socially and economically disadvantaged persons than other businesses. So that, and we also know that minority companies tend, when it comes to subcontracting, to subcontract well in excess of whatever the goal is for a typical contract. For example, if the goal is 10% or 15%, typically the winning bidder, if it's a non-minority company, will not exceed whatever that goal is for whatever reason. On the other hand, what we know from experience is that minority companies, when they win bids as prime contractors, to the extent they have to subcontract out work, subcontract out to other minority contractors. So that when you increase minority business participation at the contractor level, you simultaneously increase employment. And that is the beauty of 1212. And that is why I support it wholeheartedly. And I urge the committee to issue a favorable report.
Thank you very much, sir. So are there questions from the committee for this panel? Please use the raise hand function. Delegate Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate and Committee, for bringing this bill. Delegate, whoever is best suited to answer this question. You mentioned that we had passed some provisions in 2013, and we already required a certain percentage of minority contractors on jobs. So how do we enforce this? How do we make sure, if we pass this bill moving forward, that this is happening?
So thank you, Delegate Johnson. Globally, as the committee knows, there's a robust MBE program that the state has and has had for a number of decades. Part of the requirement when you are bidding on any kind of procurement is that you have to attest or sign an affidavit that your bid is a complete package and that you are sort of being completely truthful. I think the concept here is that if you had 50% plus one in the disadvantaged worker protection definition, you would have to attest when you bid on a particular project or state contract that was the makeup of your workforce.
Delegate Johnson?
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Rosenberg? Delegate, you're on mute. Still on mute.
Got
There we
it.
go.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Both socially and economically disadvantaged individual and socially disadvantaged individual are already defined in state law. So are there examples of how those phrases, those terms have been used in state hiring, or how else have they been used in state law in terms of the precedent for what we're trying to do here? Whoever would know the answer.
So we could follow up with you, Delegate Rosenberg. As I said earlier, this is really modeled after the federal hub zone program, which looks specifically at zip codes. And Bob can correct me if I'm wrong, because he's really the lifelong expert on this issue. But this definition is sort of modeled after the way the federal program has been established.
And I should have added earlier that to be eligible for the 10% bid preference, that eligibility is not at all conditioned upon the bidder being a minority firm. Any bidder who comes forward and certifies and then provides evidence and then agrees that it's workforce. And when I say, when we talk about workforce, we're not talking about the low paying jobs. We're talking about in every classification that would be used to perform work on that particular contract. Any bidder, red, black, green, purple, or any other color, that comes forward and agrees with this proposal and demonstrates that its workforce is comprised in the way that it's required, will get the benefit of a 10% bid preference. And on contracts, my experience that on contracts that are highly competitive, that could very well make the difference in who's awarded the contract or not. Because, and the reason why that it's not restricted to MBEs as bidders is because it doesn't make any difference to the employee who owns the company.
Mm-hmm.
And we're finally getting to the point where I think we recognize that the value of having a business is not to make wealthy people out of the owners to the public. The value of a business to the community and to the public is the extent to which that business provides an opportunity for employment to the people who need it. And that's what this bill does.
Thank you very much.
Delegate Saab?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm just trying to understand the bill. So is this the 10%, does it go to the ownership of the company or to the workforce that's the company's made out of?
The eligibility for the preference is based upon the workforce. It has nothing to do with who owns the company. If John Doe owns a company where 50% of its employees in each classification are socially and economically disadvantaged individuals, John Doe's company would be eligible for a 10% bid preference, which means that if the low bid was 90 cents and John Doe's company bid 99 cents, John Doe's company wins the contract.
So wouldn't that raise the price of the, I mean, I understand we're trying to make sure that there's diverse workforce in the trade, but wouldn't that drive the cost up? Because we're basing it on basically skin color than the quality of the work and the cost of the project.
Well, yeah, Delegate, they're having a disproportionate number of socially and economically disadvantaged people unemployed carries a cost as well. I can't, I can tell you that back in 1978, when the MBE program was first introduced, there were arguments all along that, that's going to increase the cost of to state government. What we found over the years is the exact opposite. What we found over the years is that it is an increased competition, and that the competition that's followed new businesses coming into the marketplace has resulted in all of the prices, Maryland getting very competitive prices on the work that it's bid, and that's across the state. I haven't heard any jurisdiction come forward in recent times and say that the cost of any program that mandates socially and economically inclusion, whether at the employee level or at the business level, I haven't heard anyone say in recent times that the result has been an increase in cost, or alternatively, that the increase in cost wasn't worth the investment overall.
Well, I was only saying that because you said that if John Doe is 99 cents versus 90 cents and he happened to be a minority, then he gets the contract, which will raise the price. But thank you.
Delegate Saab, if I could just add to what Bob said, I think Delegate Washington, in talking to the speaker, very rightly articulated that what happens often in the state procurement process is once somebody gets into the loop of getting state contracts, particularly minority firms, they sort of become the go-to. And I think what Delegate Washington was trying to do with this legislation is to look for a bigger pool of potentially minority, not necessarily minority-owned companies. They don't have to be minority-owned companies. I want to be clear about this.
Right.
They have 50% plus one, and Delegate Rosenberg owns the company, but his workforce is a diverse workforce. He would also qualify for this preference of 10% in consideration of the bid. So I just want to be sure everybody's clear, because I mean, look, frankly, it's a question of, do the rich guys get richer, or do we try to expand the pot? And I think Delegate Washington very rightly articulated to the speaker that we should also take into consideration what the workforce looks like, particularly as we're coming out of COVID, particularly as we're in a situation that more people are really looking for work, that this should be something that we consider.
Thank you. Delegate Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate Washington, for this bill. So I just want to get straight from the previous question. Even though there's a 10% preference, as I understand this, the preference isn't about directing how a contract is awarded, as incentivizing the bidders to diversify their workforce so they can also qualify for the 10% preference. Right. And if that understanding is correct, then I'd like to give you a chance to respond to one of the pieces of opposition testimony, since you don't get a chance to come back and talk to us. Okay. So in the letter of opposition submitted by the Maryland AGC, they argue, the Associated General Contractors, argue that there's been plenty done to incentivize people to diversify their workforce. There simply aren't enough diverse workers. And they point to Marylanders Act of 2017, calling on 45% of students to complete CTE. They talk about 2020 Department of Ed adopted the Maryland Career and Technical Education 4-year state plan, and so forth. So their argument is that the states put out a lot of effort to increase the supply of eligible employees in their trade, and we're just not meeting the goals, and therefore this bill is ill-founded or ill-based. Can you respond to that, please?
Mr. Fulton, is that? or Mr. Dashel would.
Or Delegate or Alex or whoever's best suited, I guess.
I'm happy to give it a go.
Yeah, go ahead, sir. And I'll follow up with you. I'll leave.
I guess number one, one obvious response is if in fact there aren't sufficient workers in the job classifications as needed, then no one will qualify, and therefore there will be no change. On the other hand, the fact that the state has endeavored to provide the training over the years and has apparently, if they're right, come up short, indicates there's a need to do more. Because we know that there's socially and economically disadvantaged persons out there. We know that they're severely and significantly underemployed and unemployed, and we know we need to change that situation. So maybe if we provide an incentive to all businesses, not just minority businesses, and not just members of AGC, but ABC as well, maybe if we provide incentive that the private sector will come up with ways that we don't now know or that haven't been tried by the state, so that they will become eligible for the preference that they could use to help win contracts.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other hands, thank you. I want to thank that panel, and we're going to go to a panel of unfavorable. Champ McCullough.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chairman, members of the committee. You've been given the advantage of having heard my testimony from one of your members, Delegate Hill. So I don't think I need to reiterate it. In point of fact, this bill is conditioned on the belief that the problem lies in demand, that there's not enough demand for workers that are targeted by the bill. And in fact, that is not the case, at least in the construction industry. In the construction industry, there is a serious shortage of qualified personnel, and companies have done a variety of things, including running their own training programs, including reaching out to the minority community to try to generate the supply, and it is simply insufficient. Now, I can't speak for other industries, but I think members of the committee are aware that generally across industry, availability of qualified workers is a real challenge, which is why the state has taken a number of other steps to try to increase the supply. The incremental cost of this may be small, but is it being spent the right way? Should the money be put instead into increasing the supply? And you can target that effort at minority communities, and that would be appropriate. But I think this bill, certainly well-intentioned, is not going to be particularly effective. And in the case of some industries like ours, like the construction industry, would be detrimental. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Are there questions from the committee? I'll give you a minute to raise your hands. Delegate Hill.
Thank you, Mr. McCullough. I just want to follow up. I think the answer that was given previously with respect to your testimony was that if there aren't enough folks to hire, then no company is going to qualify for the 10%, and they won't have an advantage over any other company. I mean, that is logical and makes sense to me. It incentivizes folks to do a little bit more, come up with their own apprenticeship programs, partner with local school systems, and do other things to try and gain that 10% foothold. You don't agree with that assessment, or do you?
Delegate, your logic is correct. You know, there will be virtually no construction companies of any size, GCs, subcontractors, that would be able to take advantage of this incentive. But it should be understood by the committee that all of the things that the sponsor wants to encourage are already going on in that community, in the construction industry. And it's ineffective, it's insufficient, even though, and I can give you personal examples of companies that have just gone to extraordinary lengths to try to recruit and train members of the minority community to fill some of these good paying jobs. So I think the focus of the bill is simply wrong. The focus of the efforts of the General Assembly should be on the supply. The demand is there.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Kipke.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. As a follow-up to Champ, you said two things. I got your arguments as to why you think the bill won't achieve the goals. I was able to wrap my mind around your arguments for that. But you also said it would be detrimental to the industry. And I'm at a loss for how it would be detrimental. So could you help me better understand how this would be? I kind of got the sense that you were saying that, you know, this isn't going to do what you want it to do. And then I hear you say, well, nobody's going to be able to benefit from it and use it because you're not going to be able to recruit these people anyway. But then you said it's detrimental. So how is it detrimental? That's where I'm not following you.
I think the way it is detrimental is it encourages some unscrupulous behavior. There are contractors, you know, we aren't angels. There are contractors who will bring on board unqualified workers in order to get a bid. And once they've secured the bid, then those same workers may no longer be on the payroll. So I just think that kind of behavior, while it's reprehensible, and certainly I don't think any of my members would indulge in it, is something that the bill would unintentionally encourage, and therefore I think it would be detrimental.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Rosenberg.
Champ, wouldn't your problem be better addressed by adding language to a bill that seeks to address that problem, or to provide for more the training to the extent that Kerwin doesn't already do this, or existing programs don't already do this, to provide for the training necessary so that there are people from these demographics who would count towards the 10%, than to oppose the bill?
Well, maybe I've chosen the wrong stance, but the points that I would make remain the same. As far as the state's investment in increasing the supply, pretty clearly, Kerwin is going to make a difference, and it's going to make a difference at a cost, which the General Assembly has decided is appropriate. The problem of unscrupulous behavior perhaps could be addressed in much the same way that the MWBE program works today, which requires if you're using a minority contractor that you have to certify it at the outset. And if you later want to dismiss that minority contractor, you've got to go through a justification process. You could apply that logic to a workforce, but think about the numbers you'd be dealing with in that case. Not a subcontractor as an entity, but a subcontractor with literally hundreds of employees. So I think policing the detrimental aspects is pretty problematic, frankly.
Okay. Are there any other questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, that completes the hearing on HB 1212. Thank you all for your time and your testimony today. We will move to HB 1214. Delegate Wilson. This is procurement, transparency and application to county contracts. Delegate Wilson, is he here yet? Or are we going to start with Ms. Hughes?
Just briefly, thank you,
Okay.
Delegate Collison. I think Delegate Wilson is trying to get in, but as he comes into the hearing, I just wanted to briefly remind the committee that this is another piece of legislation that is the result of the Speaker's 6-month effort at the racial and economic justice agenda. This legislation really seek to provide more opportunities for technical assistance within state agencies for potential bidders by having a liaison with the Governor's Office of Minority Affairs in every agency. And with that, I will let Delegate Wilson, who I think is now in, I'll turn it over to him. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair. Delegate Wilson here to present House Bill 1214, as you heard Alex already introduce. And basically, as we know in this state, an MBE is Maryland is a minority business enterprise in Maryland. You have to own at least 51% of your business or control it, have it be controlled by a minority. And currently, our 70 agencies in Maryland have an MBE program. Our current rate or goal for Marylanders is 29% MBE participation. But as of 2019, we're at 17.9. In fact, of the $8 billion that was awarded in procurement contracts, only 1.4 was awarded to MBEs. Of that, 6.6% of those MBE awards were African-American. Only 1.3 were to African-American women. I know we can do better. And I'm getting involved in this bill because I believe in transparency. I used to work for Northrop Grumman when I was in law school, so I did a lot of their IT procurement, as well as my family's been in it for over 50 years on a federal level. And what they've all told me and everybody I know has said, Maryland is extraordinarily difficult to bid in compared to the US government. And that's a problem. So this bill that I put in has 6 major provisions. The first is that the Governor's Office of Small Minority and Women Business Affairs will have some oversight in each of the 70 agencies. Not only will they be there to observe the procurement process and ensure the state's MBE goals are met, but they will also have some say-so on how it's being done in meetings and make sure it's done in a fair and transparent manner. This means that the solicitations that are sent out, or also called RFPs, requests for proposals, should include public instructions on how to submit the request, and any and all related documents and materials must be made public. Because what happens is you have a lot of people that have been doing this for 30 years, so they know the ins and outs. New businesses, small businesses, and minority-owned businesses have a hard time breaking in because they don't know what's necessary, what needs to be provided. This would allow everybody at basically leveling the playing field. Now, it's very important is we also have something for a notification for the unsuccessful bidders. And it requires that the e-Maryland Marketplace, within 15 days of the award being, or the winner being picked, not awarded, but picked, that a notice be sent out to all the unsuccessful bidders within 15 days. In addition, that it be posted and sent out via email or mail, because these individuals need to be able to protest. And a lot of times what you find out, you don't find out that somebody won the award, you just happen to stumble on it online. So it's not enough just to post it. They need to notify these individuals so they can be debriefed if they request or even protest. And that's why it's also important to make sure that the ability to protest, how you protest, and all that be made public on IMA with each and every RFP that goes out. There should also be publication of all the procurement related documents to make sure these individuals know that they can protest. And these protests must be done within 10 days of the notice of the contract winner being picked. Now, the big thing that we're going to run into is the county government, because I believe that counties who receive state dollars should also be subject to state laws. They're receiving state monies. They should be required to follow the same set of rules for the procurement process. And also this would allow uniformity throughout the state, because again, you don't just bid in the county you live, you bid throughout the state. Otherwise, having free reign within each county creates basically inconsistencies and makes this bill ineffective. And briefly, just for some examples, I went by some of the counties looking up. Anne Arundel uses something called port procurement procedures. Baltimore uses CityBot. Cecil uses Bidboard. Prince George's County uses contract administration online. Everybody has different goals. Some have no goals for MBE. Some don't notify what the goals are. I've looked through each of the counties. We have this volatile system. So when you're a state contractor, it's very hard to participate. What I'm trying to do is level the playing field, colleagues. I would like transparency. I would like each and every person to be able to not only participate in our procurement process, but $8 billion is nothing to sneeze at. That is a large amount of money. And our job, I say this all the time, and I tell my daughters, I don't just want the crumbs. I want the whole cake. and I want my daughters to own the bakery. That doesn't come by getting employed by the government. That comes by having your own business and ensuring that your children can inherit your business, because they cannot inherit a government job. Now I'm trying to create more minority jobs outside of the government. This will help do this. This will help us be competitive. And I believe this will do what we're trying to do as far as the Speaker's Black agenda. And that's push us forward to a more competitive part of the process.
Thank you, Delegate. I'd like to call Mr. Robert Fulton Dashiell. Oh, you're on mute, sir. Still on mute.
Okay. All right.
You're good.
I apologize.
No problem.
Same guy here. I've been a procurement lawyer in Maryland for a better part of 45 years. And I represent I was not just one of the founders of the Minority Contractors Association, but today I represent many, many contractors, large, small, minority, and otherwise. I see HB 12, along with Delegate Wilson, as an opportunity to increase competition. In the final analysis, the state, the taxpayers, everyone, at least the belief is that we all benefit with more competition. That tends to produce a better product, better service, and better pricing. The goal, the problem is in the 24 subdivisions around the state, we have different ways they all have different ways of determining ultimately who a contract's going to be awarded to, with one commonality, and that is, of course, the low bid. The problem of the low bid, quite frankly, as it relates to minority business, is that it, in effect, rewards the companies that were not excluded over the years by allowing them, rightfully now, don't get me wrong, because frankly, I have no reasonable alternative to awarding it to the low bid system. But the fact remains that the companies that are able to submit the lowest bid are those who have over the years accumulated the resources, both human and physical, that allow them to be able to submit a more competitive price than companies that didn't acquire the experience, the resources, the knowledge, the money, the skills over the years. That includes the companies that we now recognize, the state now recognizes as having been improperly excluded over the time. So the HB 1212, as I see it, attempts to, number one, allow the state to use its leverage as a funding source for those jurisdictions, to say to those jurisdictions, hey, we want you to do a better job in this area, particularly as it relates to minority business, because if you do a better job there, that's going to increase competition, and that increased competition is going to reduce the cost to the state, because that'll reduce the amount of money we have to give you to support your project. That's how I understand the bill. Now, and also perception being reality. Delegate Wilson mentions the thing about transparency, and I'm going to just give you one example, and I'm going to stop.
Oh, okay, I'm going to ask you to wrap up, sir.
I'm going to stop. The area where transparency is sorely needed is in the process of awarding contracts that have been solicited by way of competitive seal proposals. The reason that transparency is needed there because of the subjectivity necessarily involved in creating the system for selecting the winning contractor, whether it's by scores or by ranks. There's subjectivity. We need that process to be transparent, because to the extent it's not, it discourages new people from participating in the process because they think that they don't have a real opportunity to come in and participate. I'm done.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'd like to invite Jeff Hargrave to speak.
Hello, Madam. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you all today. I'm Jeff Hargrave, and I'm president of Mahogany Construction, a Baltimore-based business. And I'm here representing the Maryland Minority Contractors Association as well. Certainly HB 1214, the bill, we thank the delegate for proposing this bill. We support it, but we support it with amendments. We think that the bill could be made stronger. Certainly, the piece about notifying contractors about them not being successful is very important, because a lot of times we find out much too late. But what we would like to see happen is some teeth put into follow-up, because what I've noticed in my 30 years of construction is that we put these goals out
but there's really nobody coming behind and make sure that these goals were truly met in the way that it was intended to be met. That's where we get a lot of pastors and people that really didn't participate in projects. So we would just ask that you strengthen the bill to make sure that there's some follow-up on the participation goals. And again, if there's a way to increase the minority business piece, that would be great also. I know right now with the MBE program, it's a 29% goal. And the African-American piece is the lowest piece, out there, and there's a higher number of value put to women-owned business. And it's been proven that a lot of these women-owned businesses are really not minority firms. I mean, they may have turned into a minority firm, but that was just to get away around the system, not because they started out that way. So we ask that you strengthen the bill, that you do mail or follow up to make sure that these goals are being met. And again, we welcome the opportunity to sit down and talk about how we think the bill could be stronger.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hargrave. I would ask the committee, are there questions of from committee members now? Please use the raise hand function. Give you a minute. Delegate Krebs.
Madam Chair, and thank you all for bringing this to us. But one of the issues it seems to be in the testimony, the written testimony, has to do with, and it's brought forth on the previous bill, but it has to do with workforce, unavailability of workforce. And I guess the question is, how do we get to the root of the problem of getting enough workforce to go for these jobs? If quality workforce that are trained, and I can ask either, I think it moved around on my screen, Jeffrey or someone to answer that from the industry, minority contractors. How do we get our kids trained to be in the workforce for these jobs?
Well, certainly I think like the apprenticeship programs like Jumpstart, I'm on the JLTF board, and they've got a great program. Associated Builders has a program in Baltimore City. They just built a new school and they're trying to do training. So I think we got to be intentional. A lot of times we say the workforce is not there, but who is telling you that, right? Is the minority contractors telling you that, or is it the majority contractors? So that would be one question I would have for you, because, sometimes people say the workforce is not there when it really is there. We've got a lot of established minority businesses who we feel are capable. And again, I just think that we need to be brought into the discussion. A lot of times we're just not in the discussion. Decisions are being made, and the majority contractor community, of course, they've got the money to have lobbyists down there working for them and everything, and trying to get things through. So I think more inclusivity, including us in these decisions, and again, ask us as the workforce there, because yes, there's a shortage in workforce in construction. That's just not a minority business problem. That's an industry problem. So let's not make it like it's a minority problem where we can't provide the people needed to do the work.
Okay, thank you very much.
Delegate Krebs, can I just jump on briefly?
Delegate, we generally just take one answer, but I'll let you, if it can be quick.
No, very quick. That was part of the reason of having the governor's office of minority affairs, what it is now, involved in each of the agencies, because what the gentleman said is putting the bill. I've been hearing that for years. I'm surrounded by minority businesses who never selected for these jobs. It's not that they're not there. The process is indeed broke or being misused to the point where they're not, like the bridge in my county is being built with very little minority business participation in a majority county, Charles County. It's not that they're not there, they're just not being used correctly and they're not being notified.
Thank you, Delegate. A little bit of my breaking the rules.
Sorry.
Delegate, that's okay, it's my fault. Delegate Hill.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Delegate Wilson. So I really like the transparency and the requirement of the debriefing and education to vendors. I think that's really important, or bidders, for folks who are new to this. The question I have is, I had the experience actually with a non-minority vendor from not my district, but actually from Carroll County, who had the experience of a low bid being considered too low because the procuring agency did not understand that because they were local, they didn't have the same overhead costs as the out-of-state bidder. And then there were also some access to information that the out-of-state bidders who've been working with the state for years were availed of, that this group as a new bidder was never shown where this was. So I like those aspects. The problem was, and the question I have for you is, there's nothing in the bill that says if during the debriefing, the state or county organization realizes that they misjudged or misevaluated. I'm not saying they violated the bid and it needs to be started over, but that somehow the bidder was not evaluated appropriately. Is there benefit to having some steps or options laid out for how the state can compensate? Either will make sure that you have other offers of the next contracts, or some way that a bidder who has been, again, not given their fair weight can have corrective measures. Is there any value of putting something like that in there? Am I way off on this?
No, and I hope that it's in there because there's a difference between being awarded and selected. And I know I need to make sure that language is correct. Once they're selected, they're notified, the other people are notified they haven't got it. At that point, they can be debriefed. If on debriefing, they feel something has been done unfairly, then they protest. And that protest is done before the contract is actually awarded to anyone. That's the goal. That's
the gap, so that they can actually change how they awarded. If they found, if the state or county found out that we were actually in error, they can haven't announced the bid. I got it. Thank you.
That's right.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Chisholm.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And let me take this moment to thank Delegate Wilson for encouraging his kids to go into the private sector. That's always great to hear from a Baltimore. My question really is for Mr. Hargrove. I appreciate what you do. My dad was a bricklayer all my life, which essentially made me a brick carrier. So, you know, I've always got this, my heart's always with the construction industry and how important they really are to our society. And sometimes it's overlooked. But I'm curious, obviously you got a lot of experience in this process and you've seen it kind of materialize over the years. How many bids do you, let's say, annually submit, and how many are awarded, knowing that you're probably much better at this than your small businesses coming in for the first time?
Well, believe it or not, Delegate, the ratio is probably about 10%. So if you're bidding 100 jobs, you know, you can expect to maybe get considered for 10% of those projects. I think that if you kind of end up where you're faced with getting 40% of the jobs that you bid, you're probably too low and you're probably going to run into trouble. So I know for the contractor market, we look at 10 to 15% as a ratio when we try to plan ahead and look at how much sales, how much we need to bid in order to reach the sales we're trying to achieve. So I would say for myself and most of the community, that 10 to 15% ratio is the number.
And if I could ask one follow-up, and you feel like your margins are competitive?
Yeah, I mean, you know, one of the things that Mr. Dashu mentioned earlier about low bid and everything, you know, I guess, and I know what the state's trying to do, obviously they're trying to save money, but, you know, if in some kind of way, we got to start looking at best value, because I'll give you an example. We were trying to get in over at Johns Hopkins Hospital, and we were bidding work as a general contractor, constantly bidding the work and coming up short. When we really delved into it, what we realized was the contractors we were competing against were already on site. So where we had to come in and mobilize, we had to come in with a full-time project manager, they were already on site with their project team doing other work. So where I'm putting a 100% cost in for my PM, they're coming in at 50% or 40%. So that's where we get into trouble with that repeat work with people that are in. And then they look to keep you out as well. You know, they will bid these jobs low to keep you out, you know, because they're getting all the work. They don't want to see you come in and compete. So I think, you know, I understand low bid, but we also got to look at best value too, because low bid is a lot of times not the best value for the state. And I bet if we look back at some of those low bids, the state really got jacked up on change orders. You know, you got people out there that know how to read the specs, the documents, know how to say, okay, this is not covered, this is not covered. go in low, and then they hit you with, okay, documents omitted this, they omitted that. And then when you look at the end, they probably were the high bid. And that guy that didn't get the job, who was probably number 2 or 3, he probably had all that stuff figured. So certainly, best value's good. But, as far as percentages, again, 10 to 15% of the work you bid, you're going to get, maybe.
Excellent. Thank you for the description too. It was
You're
helpful.
welcome, Delegate. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Charles.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This question is for Mr. Jeffries. In the federal government, they have acquisition forecasts that lay out what's coming down the pipeline over the years. At EPA, for instance, they have what's coming down the pipeline for the next 3 years. So as a small business, you'll be able to navigate as a small business and find what's coming down, what you qualify for. Have you noticed that at any of these local agencies currently to help our business?
Well, I mean, a lot of times we get noticed when projects are coming out. We don't get the plan, right? We don't get the plan. I mean, and certainly, that's something where I know it's public information, but we've got to work to get the plan from the different municipalities and everything in the state. And it would be nice, like on e-Maryland Marketplace, like we can put the bids there. Why can't we put all of the forecasts there for the different jurisdictions? I mean, so I think that's something we could do to probably make e-Maryland Marketplace better and make it more accessible for contractors to know, again, what the state has planned so that they can look and say, wow, Charles County, they've got all this work planned this year. Let me get down there and see if I can meet some people and create some opportunities. So anything that can be done to help us to know what's going on would be great. I mean, it would be great if yearly, that plan went to the Maryland Minority Contractors Association so that we can pass it on to our members and they can be prepared to go after that work.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Seeing no other questions from the committee, I want to thank you all for coming and testifying today. We do have an individual who's speaking in unfavorably, so I'd like to invite Alex Butler to speak.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Alex Butler with Maryland Association of Counties. I must confess I'm not aware of the specific situation described in Charles County, but the bill does several things that would affect counties. One of them is redefining unit in the state procurement article to include counties. This subjects us to a variety of procurement provisions, regardless of whether the state is the junior partner in the contract. Counties receive state funding in a variety of ways, and requiring all these contracts to go through all state procedures could be challenging for counties and could force counties to amend their procurement ordinances or operate under 2 separate policies, and that's noted in the fiscal note. The bill requires several new procedures for the state, and by including counties in the definition of unit, it also applies it to them. These include provisions, including posting on e-Maryland Marketplace in 15 days instead of 30. We'd also have to notify by certified mail to every bidder on offer, notifying individual bidders personally, and sending certified mail adds burden to local jurisdictions. We used many different procedures, not necessarily inferior, but not perfectly in line with what's outlined in the state procurement article. We have to post notice on email and marketplace in the beginning. We are subject to MBE requirements, Buy American Steel, et cetera. Everything the state that attaches to those contracts. This bill would require us to wholesale alter our procurement operations when we use state funds. As I discussed, potentially forcing 2 operations or us to conform our entire procurement operations to one standard. We're not necessarily in opposition of the addition of additional staff from the Office of Small, Minority, and Women Business Affairs to units, as was mentioned by the delegate. Just the way that this bill interacts with county procurement, essentially requiring counties to alter their operations generally. I know that procurement it's a very tricky subject. If there are issues with getting businesses the information they need to navigate procurement at the state and county level, I think we'd be happy to engage with businesses, committee, and procurement professionals in counties to increase knowledge, make this an easier to understand process for everyone, and look at ways counties can improve. I'd welcome the opportunity to sit down in a meeting with, I think the last proponent proposed the meeting, and work through some of these important issues in coordination with the Department of General Services and all the other members of all the proponents. I'd be happy to do that. So with that, I will end my testimony. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Butler. I have 2 questions from the committee so far. Please raise your hand if you have a question. Delegate Bandari.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Alex. This question is to Alex. So pretty much you testified that already there are a lot of comprehensive area procurement requirements. We are doing enough. However, this bill, when I read the bill requires one of the provision. There are so many great provisions. One of the provision, a bidder may request a debrief within 3 days after receiving a denial of contract. And all the meeting minutes and certain documents should put in the e-Maryland market. In this age of 21st century, people use the technology. So, and on the one hand, you guys are saying that there is a lot of transparency, but you are against this bill. And pretty much you are saying that this will disrupt the long-standing framework. So could you justify on that?
Mr. Butler?
Pardon me, I'm sorry, the internet's fading in and out here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I heard my name.
Did you hear Delegate Bandari's question?
Unfortunately, I did not.
Okay, Delegate Bandari, you want to try?
Yeah, I can repeat again. Yeah, thank you. Alex, can you listen? Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful. So pretty much, testimony, you made a lot of points that already you comply with the comprehensive area procurement requirements. When I went through the bill, there are great provision. Like one of the provision I like most is a bidder may request a debrief within 3 days after receiving a denial of the contract. For example, I'm an educator, right? If a student fails, he has to know why he fails, then he can improve better, right? And other thing is meeting minutes and certain documents should be uploaded in e-Maryland market. It's 21st century, right? And people have to know, and we have to use the technology. And pretty much you are saying you are accepting the fact that, oh, we love the transparency. And on the other hand, you are opposing this since this disrupt the long-standing framework, whatever you have been doing. Could you justify on that? Why do you think that these things are not good to make things better?
Well, there are some very laudable goals in the bill, and counties use e-Maryland Marketplace to varying degrees. And as was noted by the delegate, we use a variety of different processes by county. We have our own procurement sort of databases, and we operate off of those. So additional postings on e-Maryland Marketplace would put additional burden on counties to really switch everything over in those instances. And we'd have to work around that. And in addition to the notification and the notification process is outlined in the bill, and redefining unit to include counties, it includes a variety of different measures, not even just those new ones that were described.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Delegate. Delegate Charles.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This question is for Alex, and it's just a quick question about fairness. You mentioned that a lot of the counties get, dollars from the state from various opportunities, various ways. With all of the counties getting the dollars from the state, do you think it's fair that they don't have to post as they should opportunities and use the excuse of it being burdensome when so many state dollars are going to our counties? Do you think that's fair?
Delegate, I don't think we're opposed to posting on e-Maryland Marketplaces. I'm aware that's a requirement, at least initially. I think what the bill is talking about here is, there are more provisions in it than that. It's later to do a follow-up, and it's notifying by certified mail and other things that the counties might not be equipped to do.
Okay. Thank you. Seeing no other hands, that completes the hearing on HB 1214. We thank you all for your time and your testimony today, and we will move to the next bill, which is HB 790, brought to us by Delegate Patrick Young. It's Procurement, Office of Small Minority and Women Business Affairs, Small Business Reserve Program and Veteran-Owned Small Business Enterprise Program. Delegate Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, for the record, I am Delegate Young, presenting to you HB 790. So a little bit of background. Last year, and some of this may sound familiar, I came to this committee with a task force bill that was intended to look at veteran-owned business procurement and sort of doing what this committee in its wisdom decided to, we turned into a work group. And I would like to take an opportunity to thank a few of the members, Deputy Secretary Nelson Richard, Chief of Staff Eric Lumboy, Legislative Liaison Ellen Robinson, of course, my cross-file Senator Will Smith, as well as Mr. Stephen Principe, who you'll hear from in a moment. This work group really did the work over the interim. I'm excited about the results. I'm excited to share with you, and I want you to be excited about it too, because this really is something that's been an issue related to veteran-owned businesses and procurement since I came to legislature in 2015. There have been some bills that some of you might be familiar with, where folks have tried to increase the veteran percentage. Right now, as it stands, Maryland has a 1% procurement goal established to contract with veteran-owned businesses. Unfortunately, that was done in 2010, but since then, there have only been 2 years that we have actually met that goal of 1%, and that was in 2018 and 2019. And the question comes into place, and has always been in place, why do we have trouble reaching this goal? I know that we meet it in other areas where we have these goals set, because we have a very robust veteran-owned small business community. They're all across the board. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, especially from folks that are just a member of the veteran community, to know that we have trouble reaching this goal. And I think it comes down to, and even what the previous bill was talking about, how do you contract with the state? What is the process? The difference between federal and state, and is there assistance in terms of getting those contracts? And this bill that I'm presenting to you today is intended to address a lot of those things and those concerns. So just in terms of what the bill will do, the very basic, this bill repeals the statewide goal that at least 1% of the value of procurement contracts be made to veteran-owned small businesses enterprises, or SVSBEs, and instead requires that the Special Secretary of the Governor's Office of Small, Minority, and Women Business Affairs to adopt a statewide goal by regulation. The bill includes various provisions to align management of the VSBE preference program with existing preference programs, management structures, and makes conforming changes. And finally, it establishes an advisory committee on the VSBEs within the Governor's Office of Small, Minority, and Women Business Affairs. I will mention that the work group, this is the culmination of the work group's recommendations for legislation. There were also regulatory changes that were made that we didn't need to turn into regulation or into legislation. I believe that the previous bill had intended to have things that we're trying to fix, and now we've decided to, through our conversations with DGS and other departments, and as well as veteran-owned small businesses, that regulation was good enough, and the things that we have here could really solve some of these issues related to how veteran small businesses contract with the state, how we can reach them, how they can reach us. And instead of having an arbitrary date and bills that consistently come in trying to raise that number, where it comes back usually during the hearing, why should we raise it if we can't reach it? I think the idea being that if we provide all of these resources to veteran businesses that could potentially contract with the state, and we reach the 1% goal after establishment, then the question comes into, well, if we're reaching it consistently, then we should raise it. Where before it was anecdotal, and I think we would feel good and have a sense of doing something good for veteran-owned businesses. If we increase the percentage, this really works off of data and showing that if we put these things into place that don't currently exist to assist our VSBEs, then we can meet that goal and then talk about raising it based on experience rather than anecdotal information. So with that, I will stop talking. I believe I have a few members of the panel that would be happy to present in favor of this bill, and I'll leave it to that. Questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. I'd like to invite Stephen Principe.
Sorry, I don't mute. Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. I'm Steve Principe, a proud veteran of the United States Air Force, a small business owner, and a lifelong Marylander. I'm here to support HB 790. I believe the VSB program has the potential to better serve the VOSB community. Unfortunately, the present VSBE program, which was enacted over 10 years ago, and yet most of the state agencies still failed to meet their goals. I was extremely privileged over the summer to spend many hours with the VSBE work group, working through the problems and the reasons why the program was not succeeding. Everything from the lack of participation, lack of marketing, to the lack of program oversight. House Bill 790 is a culmination of all these efforts that we all worked on all through the summer and part of the fall. And it reflects all the ideas, compromises, and aspirations of the regulatory agencies and community stakeholders. Along with other veteran-owned businesses in Maryland, believe this bill will immediately improve the program. Better than that, though, this bill will allow the program to grow organically and provide the regulations and the structure to continue to nurture the program to benefit the VSBE community and to all those who have served our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Principe, and thank you for your service.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. David Bishop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One second here, I just lost my my place, but I just want to say at the outset how nice it is to see how excited Delegate Young is about this bill, because I'm just as excited about it. So thank you very much. I'm Dave Bishop of Arnold, Maryland. Today I'm testifying on behalf of the Maryland Military Coalition and the Fleet Reserve Association. The MMC is comprised of over 150,000 members and clients across our state, and 16 different military veteran organizations. I myself am also a 16-year small business manager and / owner with government contracting background, as well as veteran-owned small business background. I just want to say that this is a really, really important step for veteran-owned businesses. Maryland has rightly long offered preferential bidding to certain categories of small business owners due to uncontrollable life circumstances in order to balance the scales of economic competition in state contracts and services. This is necessary and just in a nation that has a history of discrimination or disadvantage against such life circumstances. However, many entrepreneurs within our state are not necessarily the victims of life circumstance, but people, minorities and otherwise, who have volunteered to give the ultimate sacrifice to defend our freedoms. These men and women made the personal choice to serve our country, often at great personal expense and at the minimum, highest personal risk. They set aside pursuit of professional careers to provide such service to our country, sometimes delaying their possibilities of success in the private sector. Now, the government in which these great veterans serve does provide greater competitive advantage to those who pursue academic options after, during service. Unfortunately, it's failed at providing a competitive boost to those who may not be as academically inclined or who might have a greater ability in different fields. So additionally, in this hearing today, we've heard multiple testimonies about many Maryland agencies struggling to meet their assigned goals. I could get into the lack of enforcement action and procurement, but instead I'd rather highlight that opening veteran-owned small businesses to access to MBE certification will also help those agencies meet their goals. Our state and federal government provides employer incentives to hire veterans, but doesn't give the same level of incentive for self-determination and starting our own businesses. Since its inception, self-certifying option for the Small Business Reserve has limped along, barely even offering any real opportunity for veteran-owned businesses. It's time these entrepreneurs are recognized as deserving of their efforts and sacrifice in our state. I strongly encourage a favorable reading on House Bill 790 to allow veteran-owned small businesses to be included in the MBE program. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Mr. Michael Coburn.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Michael Coburn, Principal of Providence Strategies. We represent Mr. Principe and SMI Services. I also had the privilege of participating in the VSB work group last year and would like to echo the thoughts of Mr. Principe and Delegate Young, who did a great job describing the bill to you today. The work group did a fantastic job of identifying and addressing the program's deficiencies, which is what you have before you. As everyone has said, it's the culmination of all of our efforts. As such, I believe this bill will have a profound impact on the VSB program and I respectfully request a favorable report on House Bill 790. I'm happy to answer any questions, and with that, I would yield my time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Coburn. Mr. Patrick Gibao.
Hello, Delegate Collison and members of the Health and Government Operations Committee. I'm Patrick Gibao, representing both the American Red Cross, the American Legion, I've got too many, and the Maryland Military Coalition. Owning a small business is one of those dreams every working person aspires to. For becoming an entrepreneur means the talent that he or she has developed are making an economic living for this person and their family and being a positive contributor to the community. To achieve this dream, though, some need a helping hand. And in our estimation, this is why the Office of Small, Minority, and Women Business Affairs was created. Adding veteran-owned business enterprises, as outlined in House Bill 790, will be a strong, meaningful step for serving a desirous element of the community. Ensuring the establishment of a percentage goal and procurement contracts under the regulations set forth in the bill will ensure fairness in the bidding process. The Maryland Military Coalition and the American Legion, representing nearly 200,000 people in the 23 counties in Baltimore City, request a favorable report on HB 790, and we wish to commend Delegate Young for his continual and steadfast support for veterans. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Questions from the committee? Delegate Charles.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This question is for Delegate Young. Delegate Young, with the SBA, the Small Business Administration, at the federal level, they have set-asides for SDVOSBs. Also, they have the VOSB as well for veteran-owned small businesses. But one of the set-asides that they actually pay attention to, and they actually set a percentage goal across all of the federal agencies, is specifically for service-disabled veteran-owned small business, and that's at 3%. Have you ever thought about changing this from just being veteran-owned small business and making it focus more in line with the federal government so that it's a line to show that those who truly made the hardest sacrifice, which is our service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses, have the opportunity in putting that goal at 3% so that it kind of matches up? Because I saw you deleted the 1% in here, and I was looking at that and wanted to make sure we could possibly make that 3%. So
sure. So
that's kind of like a two question.
No worries. So I'll say that the background and the work group didn't really bring up the discussion about, but in terms of identifying or separating out disabled veteran-owned businesses and just veteran-owned businesses, we just kind of tried to stay in line with what we currently had in terms of definitions for the state, to make it easier in terms of legislation, and because the office, it just seemed to make sense in terms of the statute that was already there, what we were applying to. Plus, if there is another bill or there's no more consideration that you'd like to have a discussion about separating or identifying disabled veteran small-owned businesses differently, I'd be happy to have that conversation with you during the interim. But this particular bill, we figured we'd focus on what was currently there and addressing the issue that's been consistently coming up, which you mentioned. We're at 1%. I think the long-term goal is to increase, and that's this underarching piece of why we wanted to do a task force last year and why we did a work group and why we have these changes now is because there had been attempts to increase from 1% to 2% to 5% to 3%. Multiple in the last 7 years have seen at least 4 attempts to increase it. And during the hearings, it was, well, why should we increase it if we can't reach the 1%? So instead of attacking it, or excuse me, going at it from a perspective of 1%, let's increase it so that we have a higher percentage but never reach it. Let's get to the crux of the issue related to why we can't reach the 1%. And if we fix that, and then we can reach 1%, which while we repeal it in terms of the statute, it's left up to the special secretary to identify in regulation. Then we come back in another year, next year, 2 years from now and say, you know what, let's go to 3%. We've met that 1% right away as soon as these things were put into place. And now we have the data and we actually show that we can reach that percentage. Let's get to a point where we can, let's increase it so we can meet more of the procurement needs of the veteran owned population. So I think I got some work to do with you, Delegate Charles. I'd love to talk more about the disabled and veteran small businesses around the state too.
Definitely. Sounds good.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Chisholm.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate Young, for bringing this bill. And I applaud the goal for sure. But I do want to ask, because I'm curious, the attainability. Do you know what percentages or what percentage of small businesses in the state of Maryland are actually veteran owned?
I don't have the percentage per se, and I'll throw it back to the panel too, okay, in terms of numbers, because I don't have that number written down right in front of me.
Yeah, it'd be great to know that number.
Yeah, I know we do have the number of veteran-owned small businesses. And here's another piece of it too, which came up during the work group. How is it defined? And one, if you define as one federally, or you define on state level, which we clarify, and part of this bill is about clarifying that so that a veteran-owned business doesn't have to go through multiple levels of certification, or if they certify one place, what identifies with that. So I think I don't have the percentage to answer your specific question, but I will get you a number of all the number of veteran small businesses that are in the state of Maryland. So
excellent. Thank you very much.
I believe I have that answer.
Great. Go ahead, Mr. Principal.
Yeah, actually, I was just looking at it this morning, excuse me. But right now, the list that I have of active and people that are listed as, I don't know if they're CVE through the federal government, but as listed as veteran-owned businesses in the state of Maryland right now is around 1,200 is what I have on this Excel spreadsheet that was sent to me just a couple weeks back, I think it was.
I apologize, Madam Chair. Didn't mean to cut you off if one person was supposed to answer.
Delegate Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate Young, for this bill. I don't know if this question is for you or Mr. Principe. So recognizing that we have a debt to our veterans that, we can never fully pay, and that we have multiple programs, federal and state, that try and address that. How do we approach veterans' preference and guard against adding back to programs that were designed to help traditionally disadvantaged groups to make up for historic competitive disadvantage? How do we, when we do these veterans programs like in this bill, how do we protect against adding back to the disadvantaged group of minority and women-owned business, as a minority and a woman, the same groups that have already been preferenced historically, right? So veterans encompass a wide range.
Yes, ma'am.
Right, including folks who have not traditionally been disadvantaged.
Correct.
We capture all veterans and put them in, some of whom, for instance, I've worked with veterans who after 20 years have a great pension and actually in better shape for doing some other jobs because they have pensions that other people after 20 years of work don't. So how do we do what we want to do for veterans without basically undermining what we're trying to do for other groups that have been broadly and traditionally disadvantaged, like women and minorities?
So I can comment, Mr. Principe.
Yes,
I can comment. Okay. So I appreciate the question, Delegate, because that was also not the exact discussion, but during the work group and during the interim. Where do we house this? Where does this go? And how do we make sure that we're not adding to another problem that we've been trying to fix with other groups? So that there was a question related, not here, but just about putting it in the governor's office of small minority and women business affairs, because it's already set up to handle and they already manage programs like this. So it made sense to be there, but also for that same, I think, safeguard of preventing this program from taking away from another one, or from overshadowing another one. Because you're right, we do everything we can to thank our servicemen and women for the work that they've done, but we don't want to separate them or hold them above other groups that we're trying to assist. So to that, this bill doesn't necessarily address that particular issue, other than we thought that the best place to put it was into the office that already dealt with those things. So when it comes to setting that regulation, that 1% or the 3%, or coming back with legislation to increase it to 3 or 5%, then the office is going to come back with the committee that's been set up, the advisory group, to advise us on whether doing so, in my opinion, I would hope, would let us know that it would affect another group that we're not trying to affect. But that would be my answer.
Okay.
Concur with that also.
And I would add, if I could, Delegate.
Mr. Bishop, we generally just let one answer for each time. Thank you. You're welcome to email any of the delegates or the committee, and we'll get the information out. Seeing no other committee members with questions, that completes the bill hearing on HB 790. Thank you, Delegate Young. Thank you both for your time and your testimony here today. And we will move to the next bill, which is House Bill 722. This is Delegate Ivy. It's Procurement Disparity Studies, African American owned businesses. Delegate Ivy.
Thank you, Madam Chair and colleagues. For the record, Delegate Julian Ivy here presenting House Bill 722. House Bill 722 would require the Maryland Department of Transportation as the certification agency for the Minority Business Enterprise Program in consultation with the Office of the Attorney General to contract an independent consultant to review the state's 2017 disparity study. The review must evaluate by October 1st whether the data in the study demonstrate a compelling interest to implement remedial measures to assist African American owned businesses separately from the existing MBE program. If the findings are inconclusive, MDOT, in consultation with the Office of the Attorney General, must initiate a disparity study to determine if there are patterns of discrimination in awarding state contracts to African American owned businesses as compared with patterns of discrimination against firms owned by members of other minority groups. If a second study is required, at least in the legislation, it would be completed by June 30th of 2022. Over the last several years, we've authorized disparity studies to review minority participation in Maryland's medical marijuana industry and in sports betting. These recent disparity studies have all concluded that there are continued and ongoing disparities in the overall annual wages, business earnings, and rates of business formation between minority males and minorities and women in Maryland, especially where African Americans are concerned. Just from the fiscal note specifically, it also found continued disparities in the use of MBEs by the state compared to their availability in the marketplace to perform work in designated categories of work. Additionally, African American owned construction businesses were paid 5.1% of state construction contract dollars, but they made up 10.3% of the construction sector in the relevant state marketplace. Lastly, non-minority women-owned construction businesses were paid 7.5% of state construction contract dollars, but made up 13.7% of the construction sector. An essential component of good governance is reviewing state procurement processes to ensure they're effectively including the participation of African American owned businesses in the MBE program. To fully live up to the aspirations of the Black Lives Matter movement, Black owned businesses have to matter too. With that, I'm asking for a favorable report on House Bill 722. And I'm glad to be joined by Reverend Kobe Little with Maryland NAACP. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Delegate. Reverend Little.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. I'm Reverend Kobe Little. I represent the Maryland State Conference of the NAACP, and I'm delighted to stand before you today to testify in support of House Bill 722. This legislation is really about making sure that all Marylanders are able to do business with the state of Maryland. and that if there are impediments in place that prevent African American or Latinx or women or people with disabilities from doing business in the state, that we study what those issues are. We see if the studies that have already been done provide solutions, and if not, that we study to see what the solutions can be. It makes complete sense that everyone would support this bill, because when all Marylanders thrive, all of Maryland thrives. When some Marylanders are left behind, then all of Maryland is left behind. Now, we've testified this session before a number of committees in support of legislation that helps those who are least financially secure, those who are vulnerable. And often what we hear is about the impact on small businesses. And I've always said it's a false dichotomy to lump small businesses and workers in opposition to one another. But I want to be clear, what I've also said is, in addition to helping individuals and families and workers, we should be supporting small businesses. And the vast majority of businesses in the MBE program are small businesses. Supporting this legislation is an excellent opportunity for this committee to make its mark in advancing equity in Maryland. Without equitable participation in the economy, there is no democracy. So we urge a favorable report, and we thank the committee for its consideration.
Thank you, Reverend. Are there questions from committee members? Delegate Saab.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, delegates, for this bill. I guess I just wanted to expand a little bit or try to understand a little bit more the fiscal note. It starts saying expenditure exceed by 75,000 for 2022, and then it goes between $1 million to $3 million, not likely until 2023, 2024. So can you explain to me a little bit more further the fiscal note and why this high, and what's the difference between 75 in 1 year and then it goes to $1 million to $3 million in the remaining years?
Absolutely. And thank you, Delegate. It's a wonderful question. In the fiscal note I'm looking here, it says if a second disparity study is required, that's where the total between 1 million and 3 million would be kicking in.
It's good to see my good friend Delegate Saab. I'd like to also just speak to the question, Delegate Ivy. You also note, though, that the Department of Transportation.
Reverend, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we generally just accept one answer from to each question. So, feel free to communicate with the committee any further information you have.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If there's another delegate who'd like to ask a question, I'm available.
That's always a possibility. Thank you. I'll look, Delegate Bandari.
Yeah. Thank you, Reverend Colby. You made an excellent point. In all of the opposition testimony, the testimony was basically it is virtually impossible to find economically or socially disadvantaged workers with the required knowledge, skill, and ability needed. And you made an excellent point that there is always false dichotomy to lump small businesses and workplace knowledge. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Sure, and thank you, Delegate Mandari, for the question. Let me also say that by helping businesses that participate in the MBE program, we're also expanding opportunities for Marylanders to be employed and to participate in the economy. On the fiscal note, the Maryland Department of Transportation is in the process of letting a bid for an additional study. So while the fiscal note notes that there may be an increase to pay for an additional study if that's required, the fiscal note also says that there may not be that cost because the study that the Department of Transportation is offering a bid for now may be able to encompass the work that needs to be done. So I guess you got to read through the details. The numbers aren't listed there in the fiscal note, about what the cost would be if the Department of Transportation study can double as the additional needed study for this legislation.
Thank you.
Delegate Bandari, did I speak to your question?
Yeah, you did.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, that concludes the hearing on House Bill 722. Thank you, Delegate Ivy.
Thank you.
For your
Y'all have a
time
great
and,
one.
and testimony today. We will move to House Bill 797. This is Delegate Shi. It's Procurement, Small Business Reserve Program, Administration and Application. Delegate Shi, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am excited to be back at HGO again. Guess what? My first bill was at HGO, and now this is my last bill of the session back at HGO again. It's just amazing. So right after the new year, and of course, I'm Delegate Lily Chi here to present HB 797. Right after the new year, Governor Hogan issued an executive order to increase small business participation in state procurement by designating all state procurements between $50,000 and $500,000 for the Small Business Reserve Program, SBR, with a few exceptions. This was a welcomed move for our small business community and good for Maryland's economy. HB 797 builds on the governor's executive order by codifying that all state agencies' purchases of goods and services under $500,000 should be designated for the SBR program, unless the agencies seek and receive exemptions for certain contracts from the coordinating office, which is the Governor's Office of Small Minority and Women Business Affairs. This bill also requires public universities in Maryland, which are currently exempt from most SBR provisions, to be subject to the same requirements as state agencies. So essentially, this bill codifies and enhances the governor's executive order to make sure that when it comes to government contracting, the default is to start with small business reserve, not the exceptions. That intentionality can make all the difference in the agency's willingness to identify small businesses to compete for RFPs. With this bill, we not only expand state contracting opportunities to include the smallest of purchases, but also help collect more accurate data on true participation of our small businesses in state procurement. Because currently, while state agencies are required to spend at least 15% of their total expenditures with registered SBR vendors, only those contracts specifically designated for the SBR program may be counted towards their targets. So if a department ends up contracting with an SBR vendor, but the contract was not specifically designated as such, then it wouldn't count. So this bill would actually help them capture more accurate data, including those incidental contracts with small businesses. I think we can all agree that there is simply no better time than now to help our struggling small businesses in whatever way we can. And this is a relatively easier way to help them while also contributing to our local economy. So I want to thank you for your consideration and like to turn to my witnesses.
Thank you, Delegate. I'd like to call a District 19er, Paul Bardak.
Thank you so much, Delegate Cullison. It's good seeing you again.
Good to see you, Paul.
Members of the committee, my name is Paul Bardak. I'm Director of the Maryland Small Business Development Center, and I appear before you today to offer our support for HB 797. Last year alone, our Small Business Development Center provided one-on-one consulting services and group training to over 9,000 clients, helped them raise more than $148 million, supported nearly 54,000 Maryland jobs, and even in the midst of these terrible times, helped 267 entrepreneurs start their own new companies. We also oversee the Maryland Procurement Technical Assistance Center, which offers to its clients consulting, training, and federal, state, and local government contracting opportunities. So from our unique perspective, encompassing small Maryland businesses of all types, including smaller government contractors, we're here to tell you how crucial enactment of this bill is. It would codify the governor's executive order to increase small business participation in state procurement. It would create a 15% state small business procurement requirement, and it would allow small businesses to pursue government contracts of less than $500,000. Every day, we of the Maryland Small Business Development Center see that small business owners throughout our state need help to compete successfully in the government contracting world. Strengthening the Small Business Reserve Program absolutely would provide that sorely needed help. And so we hope your committee will view this bill with favor. Thank you much.
Thank you. And Tricia Swanson, please.
Good afternoon, members of the Health and Government Operations Committee. My name is Tricia Swanson, and I am Vice President of Government Relations for the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce, here in support of House Bill 797. Over the last year, the Chamber has been advocating at the local, state, and federal level on behalf of our members. We've also hosted webinars on best practices in this new COVID-19 world. And through these webinars and in advocating for our members, what we're hearing is essential to a business's survival is the permanency of many executive orders that were implemented during the pandemic. So in that spirit, this bill would make permanent and build upon the governor's executive order back in January and aims to increase small business participation in state procurement. More specifically, the Chamber especially appreciates the inclusion of all small contracts, including those under $50,000, in the Small Business Reserve Program. House Bill 797 acknowledges that small business participation in the state's procurements should be increased and that the purposes of Maryland's procurement law are to ensure fair and equitable treatment of all persons who deal with the procurement system. Further, participation in the state's procurements foster broad competition through support of free enterprise. Maryland small businesses employ 1.2 million people and are the backbone and leading job creators in Maryland's economy. Any additional support for these key small businesses to survive the public health emergency and continue to employ our neighbors and grow our economy is essential. For the aforementioned reasons, the Chamber supports House Bill 797 and urges a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions from the committee? Okay. I see no questions from the committee. Thank you. Thank you for your time and your testimony today. That concludes the hearing on HB 797. I thank you, Delegate, for bringing us the bill. I am going to do one more bill before our break, and that is HB 1244, brought to us by the Speaker Pro Tem Sample Hughes, State Procurement Concrete Preference. Delegate Sample Hughes.
Sure. Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Today I bring before you House Bill 1244, State Procurement Concrete Preference. This bill will make it a preference, will make concrete a preference of the state to use in a form of a low carbon blended cement, which is Portland limestone cement. And I'll refer to it from here thereafter as PLC, which is more environmentally friendly. Other than water, concrete is the most used material in the world, representing approximately 50% of all man-made materials by mass. Concrete is also very prevalent because of its the ability to use it in multiple ways, but its production is a very carbon-intensive process. So because of this, even a small reduction in the CO2 used to create it will have a massive impact on our environment. By making a preference for PLC, Maryland can expect to see a 10% reduction in CO2 output from concrete plants. We will be following 32 states that have already accepted this cement, and we have some of those as our neighboring states. Case in point, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, and North Carolina. So it is my understanding that this usage of PLC doesn't have downsides. I had also inquired as to whether or not this would affect any of our employees here in the state of Maryland. It is my understanding that we won't have any fewer employees. We will not see any job losses as a result of going to a more environmentally friendly use of concrete. Currently in the state of Maryland, we have 2 plants, one in Union Bridge that is already fitted to make this new environmentally cement, and then the other being in Hagerstown, which has plans to make an investment of about $250,000 to begin the production. Both of the surrounding areas will benefit greatly from the reduced pollution, and the new concrete is revenue neutral. Today, members, you did receive 2 letters of opposition from Maryland Transportation Builders and Materials Association, and also Maryland Asphalt Association. The question within those letters of opposition was, what else do we make a preference in the state of Maryland as it relates to energy or environmentally friendly items? So I did want to take this step a little further and enlighten you that in our own Department of General Services Green Purchasing Manual, some examples of preferences include our Energy Star appliances, alternative fueled vehicles, recycled paper, mercury-free products, locally grown food, energy efficient fixtures. So at the end of the day, it's my belief that it's important for us to make those decisions of being inclusive, of doing what we can do to make our environment a little better, a little safer for all of our Marylanders. And I know that this would have a positive impact on our environment. And for those reasons, I do urge for a very favorable vote on today. I do have panelists that will provide additional information as we move forward in this bill discussion. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. I'd like to invite John Favasa.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm John Favasa. I'm with Manus Canning and Associates, and I'm here today on behalf of Lafarge Holcim. I'd like to start by thanking the Speaker Pro Tem for her sponsorship and her leadership on this issue this year. In Maryland, Lafarge Holcim and its 650 employees operate, as the sponsor said, a cement plant in Hagerstown, but also a broad ready mix and construction materials operation throughout the state, primarily in Central Maryland. We're here today in support of the legislation because we recognize the importance of being a proactive participant in moving the ball forward on sustainable construction. And for Lafarge Holcim, it's been a multi-pronged approach. First, we've made a $100 million reinvestment in our plant in Hagerstown to make it more efficient and more environmentally safe operation. 2, we've constructed a solar field that provides 25% of the plant's energy requirements. And we're aggressively investing in technologies and products that together are going to serve as the building blocks for a more sustainable future. So how does this bill fit into that plan? It's a modest procurement bill that will hopefully jumpstart the use of sustainable blended cement products into the marketplace. As the sponsor, has indicated, the manufacturing process here for cement, it's carbon intensive. It requires the heating of limestone at very high temperatures, and these blended cement products rely less on that process, reducing the carbon footprint of cement production generally. Within the industry, this really feels like we're at a tipping point where a very small step, like legislation like this bill, could help foster broader, more meaningful change where these blended cement products evolve into the construction standard. As the sponsor mentioned, the opposition, just briefly, we'd like to say, like, cement is the most prevalent man-made product on the face of the earth. It's different, and it's important that we deal with this issue right now. The use of cement is going to continue, throughout the world, and we need to start moving the ball forward on, improving, the carbon footprint and the environmental benefits that we can get from a legislation like this. Chris Clow from Lafarge Holcim is here He's an expert on this, and he'll follow me up and can answer many specific questions that you may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Since you referenced Chris Clow, we'll go with Mr. Clow.
All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Madam Chair. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this group today as one of the producers of ready mix concrete in the state of Maryland. Quite excited about the opportunity to speak to you today and happy to answer any questions. So I do have a couple of things to say, though, just to kick us off. So thank you very much for the opportunity to provide testimony on House Bill 1244. I am providing this testimony on behalf of my employer, Lafarge Folsom. We are a local producer of cement and concrete with operations throughout Maryland, as already been said. Our dedicated manufacturing professionals and engineers help to provide building materials that support our entire state, including materials that have been used to construct the Purple Line, the Route 200 Intercounty Connector, and the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. We've been active in this market for a very long time, servicing a lot of state work. People often use the term cement and concrete interchangeably, so I always like to cover the basics. Cement is a binder in concrete, and concrete is the finished product which we see in everything from sidewalks, homes, roads, bridges, dams, and skyscrapers. In fact, concrete is the second most used material in the world, second only to water. We recognize the built environment is a major source of carbon emissions, accounting for approximately 40% of global emissions, a number that's likely to grow over the next 2 decades as population growth continues, urban migration increases, and more infrastructure is needed to support our communities. I believe the adoption of this bill can help unlock the future of sustainable construction. Today, cement producers can produce blended cements with a lower carbon footprint than traditional cement. Type 1L cement is made by adding fine crushed limestone to cement blends, and by replacing a portion of the clinker with ground limestone, we lower the carbon footprint of cement by 10%. Very simple. Type 1L cement has been approved for use in over 30 states. Tests have been shown that Type 1L cement is similar in terms of cost and performance. To date, over 900 lane miles of highway paving has been completed with Type 1L cement in Colorado, Utah, and Oklahoma. Unfortunately, its adoption in Maryland has been slow. This bill can change that by establishing a low carbon procurement preference for state procurement projects, and the state can use its purchasing power to drive innovation and help reduce carbon emissions in Maryland. On behalf of Lafarge Folsom and our 650 employees in Maryland, I respectfully ask that you favorably report this legislation. Working together, we can help reduce carbon emissions in Maryland.
Thank you. Ms. Robin Jessica Clark.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Robin Clark, Maryland staff attorney with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, here today in support also of HB 1244. This appears to be a reasonable step by the state to encourage offices and agencies to purchase the cement blends as have been described to minimize the need for producing new cement, a greenhouse gas intensive process. I'll speak a little bit about the Bay and greenhouse gases, since you've heard the cement side. Greenhouse gases contain nitrogen, and that nitrogen can wash out of the air in the form of rain falling into the Bay and contributing to algal blooms. Those blooms cloud the water and absorb oxygen, which creates dead zones in the Bay that cannot support underwater grasses, crabs, fish, other marine life. A third of the nitrogen pollution going into the Bay is coming from the air. It's coming from industrial sources, such as power plants and vehicle emissions, but also industry sources like the cement industry. The Phase 3 WIP in Maryland, which is the Watershed Implementation Plan, our responsibility as a state under the multi-state Chesapeake Bay Blueprint, requires us to reduce up to 5 million more pounds of nitrogen. Now, we've got an additional requirement called the Climate Watershed Implementation Plan. And that's because of all this nitrogen pollution coming from the air, coming from greenhouse gases. That's adding to the Bay cleanup project. It's adding potentially to the cost that we must expend to clean up the Bay, an additional 1.1 million pounds of nitrogen just for the climate WIP. For these reasons, we strongly support the state to adopt this bill. We urge the committee's favorable report to send a message that Maryland too is a leader on climate change. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. Are there questions from the committee? I'll give you a second. Okay. All right. I see no questions from the committee. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 1244. Thank you all for your time and testimony today. And the committee will now take a 30-minute break. It is 3:20. We will return at 3:50 to complete the agenda. Thank you. Okay, if the committee could come back on camera, we will get started. Welcome back to the Health and Government Operations Committee. I hope that brief intermission allowed you time to at least peek at the sun and stretch a little bit. We have 4 more bills for our session this afternoon. We are going to start with House Bill 775, brought to us by Delegate Kittleman. This is Task Force to Study the Establishment of Regional Centers for Women's Veterans. Thank you and welcome, Delegate Kittleman. Delegate, are you on mute? Delegate Kittleman, I saw you, but we're not hearing you yet.
I think she left and is coming back in right now.
Oh, okay.
She should be in the room now.
Okay, Delegate Kittleman.
Thank you.
There we go.
And thank you, Madam Chair and committee. I am extremely proud to bring to you today HB 775, that would create a task force to study the establishment of regional centers for women veterans. This bill was submitted last year, and it met the fate of so many other bills when we had to adjourn early. And so we brought it back this year. We do have services in the state of Maryland for women veterans, but there are certain unique features that need to be addressed that aren't there yet. We're 52,000 women veterans in Maryland, which is 14% of the total. That's above the national average of a little over 9%. So there is a need. I'm going to let my 2 wonderful witnesses, 2 women veterans, talk about that need. But I wanted to let you know first that I think you saw we do have the endorsement of the Veterans Caucus, and this morning we earned the support of the Women's Caucus. And one last comment, you might also have seen the testimony from the Secretary of the Veterans Affairs. I had a wonderful talk with him this morning, and we will be bringing some amendments to make the bill a bit more doable by the Veterans Department. So we will bring this as soon as we get them drafted. At this point, I would like to introduce my 2 witnesses and then let them talk. First is Mercy McKinley. She is a retired staff sergeant from the United States Army, a veteran of the Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation New Dawn. She is a military sexual trauma survivor and certified victim advocate. She assists in shaping policy, including the Deborah Sampson Act. She is a veteran within Prince George's County. My other witness is Tanya Barnett, who is an Air Force veteran. She is currently the Director of Racial and Ethnic Justice and head of the Anti-Racism Task Force at the George Washington University. She is the author of 3 books, a former 2-time triathlete and marathon runner. She has been featured on radio and TV, including the Today Show. And finally, she is a 2018 NAACP Hall of Famer and the 2016 Charles County Citizen of the Year for her work with the Forever Free books. And with that, I would like to have our witnesses begin. Mercy, did you want to begin?
Thank you, Delegate. Sergeant McKinley?
Yes. Good afternoon, Madam Chairman of the committee and members of the Health and Government Operations Committee. My name is Mercy McKinley, and I'm a veteran in Prince George's County, Maryland, and a member of Service Women Action Network in support of HB 775. House Bill 775 represents approximately 3 years of advocacy efforts in bringing awareness to the unique challenges that women veterans face in addressing their overall health care and mental health needs, especially as it pertains to military sexual trauma and post-traumatic stress. Women veterans currently represent 10% of the identified 20 million American veterans. In roughly 15 years, this is projected to increase to 18%. According to the fiscal year 2020 annual Maryland Department of Veteran Affairs report, 384,662 veterans currently occupy the state of Maryland. If these statistics are accurate, this number is also expected to increase, as 1 in 4 female veterans whom experience military sexual trauma separate or are rapidly separated from service in less than 18 months following their assault. Last year alone, the most recent data provided by the Department of Defense on sexual assault showed a 50% increase in sexual assaults and rapes against military women. This presents additional challenges to women veterans during the separation from service process, access to health care, and ability to adequately address their mental health, thus increasing the chance of suicide within the first 36 months post-separation from service. Moreover, this shows how a healthcare system that has already been identified as inept at providing adequate services to women veterans can lag behind even further in the future. It is proposed that women veterans represent 1.2 million of the 4.8 million veterans who have been identified as experiencing military sexual trauma. This alone represents a fraction, since it only represents the number of women veterans who seek or can receive treatment with the Department of Veteran Affairs. This also does not represent the women veterans who develop complex PTSD to both military sexual trauma and experiences during combat operations. In consideration of HB 7075, it is important for the members of the Health and Government Operations Committee to ask themselves certain questions. These questions are but not limited to: does the state of Maryland know the current accurate state of its women veteran population? Does the state of Maryland know how many of the women veteran population are affected by the mischaracterization of discharges that present barriers to employment, disability compensation, and access to healthcare services? If there's any doubt to being able to definitively answer these questions, then support of HB 775 could provide these answers. In 2019, the annual budget for the Department of Veteran Affairs was $500 billion, in which less than 1% was allocated towards services for women veterans, thus impacting the quality of services and limiting the services that women veterans receive. Organizations for women veterans have to fight on a federal level for services, as you can see by the percentage allocated in that fiscal year in comparison to what it yields.
Sergeant, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up. I've given you a little bit of extra time from the sponsor, but wrap up your testimony. That'd be terrific.
I understand. I ask that members of the committee support HB 775 and recognize the key component that what it ultimately does. The key proponent is the study and wealth of information a task force will provide as outlined in Section F of the bill itself. It will empower the state of Maryland with the knowledge and capabilities required to take the appropriate action in caring for the women veteran population. More importantly, it would allow the targeted efforts in servicing the women veteran population. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tanya Barnett, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I am Tanya Barnett. Thank you, Madam Chair and esteemed committee members. I am excited and here to support House Bill 775. I'm a 100% permanent and totally disabled woman veteran that uses the VA for all of my medical needs. Even though I use the VA for all of my medical needs as a woman and the services that I need as a woman, it is difficult to have access to those needs. Part of the bill's task force said that you guys will be studying how many women veterans are in the state of Maryland. If you actually go to the Maryland Department of Veterans Affairs 2020 annual report, that number is there, and my colleagues have already shared that information, so I'm not going to go over that again. However, only 9% of women veterans use the VA for their health care. And in the state of Maryland, we have approximately 54,000 women veterans, which means that would be less than 10,000 women veterans are using the VA for their care, and that care is lagging. One of the things that the VA promises women veterans is well-being support, mental health, which includes PTSD as well as MST support, OBGYN care, and other programs. The difficulty for women veterans is that when you call to make appointments, you're often pushed off to community care, which then becomes the middleman, and you're waiting for calls back from those individuals for care. Why do we need this regional center in the state of Maryland? One of the reasons why we need it is that access to the Washington, D.C. Medical Center for veterans is out of the way for a lot of individuals. The other thing that I would request at this task force is that you seek to find women providers that are of color, as well as admin and volunteers. We also need women providers who can provide an intersectional approach to care, especially regarding religious and cultural competency. We also need an LGBT veteran care coordinator and providers who are knowledgeable and comfortable with assessing the needs of trans women. And I would like to ask, as my closing, one of the things that the task force can do is host Zoom town hall meetings for women veterans that are private, where you're solely listening to the needs of women veterans as opposed to reports and statistics. Provide liaisons in each county who will work with the Veterans Commissions to educate them on the task force. Contact VA leadership and make sure that there is diversity and inclusion. If you go to the executive bios on the veteran website, as well as the Maryland Veteran Leadership staff bios, there are no people of color. And also I want you all to recognize that this is given a 1-year timeline from October 2021 to October 2022. We're currently in a pandemic. So that means that there are women veterans who are unhoused who still need mental health care, as well as monies to take care of their children. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for your service. Questions from the committee? I have a question, Delegate Kittleman, before I go to Delegate Hill. Did I hear you say that you were looking at amending the bill to make it a work group in the Office of Veteran Affairs?
Not necessarily in the Office of Veteran Affairs, but to do some of the issues that the Secretary brought up, we need to accommodate their staffing, and whether or not it's going to be a physical women's center, or what he pointed out was the thing that seems to be best practices is, let me find his words, name of it, to create a position program, women veterans coordinators. In other words, to expand the task of the task force to look at everything beyond just the centers. And there are some budgetary concerns that obviously we need to consider when we're talking about physical plants.
Okay. Thank you. Delegate Hill.
Thank you. Thank you for this bill, Delegate Kittleman. I'm just curious, I heard Ms. Barnett, and thank you for your service, talk about other groups that she thought should be explicitly listed. And I also see that there's in the bill specific representation from the General Assembly for Prince George's County and Anne Arundel County. So I'm really asking about the makeup, why those specific counties are listed as being represented. And are you open to the suggestions of Ms. Barnett with respect to LGBTQ, women veterans, and minority representation explicitly?
Absolutely. I was trying to take notes as she was talking. And I'll be frank, I cannot remember when we drafted this a year ago, why those two counties were specifically noted. I will find out the answer and get back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee? Then I thank our two witnesses on behalf of the whole committee for your service to our country. And thank you, Delegate Kittleman, for bringing us this bill. This concludes the hearing on HB 775, and we will go to the next bill, which is HB 660. Delegate Chisholm, our own. Delegate Chisholm, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, I'm Delegate Brian Chisholm here to present HB 660, and you are correct. It's always great to be in front of the home team, as you say. This is a pretty simple bill. If you recall, we passed the Maryland Veteran Service Animal Program a few years ago, and it's working great. The Department of Veterans Affairs is doing some incredible stuff with it, and it's really having a tremendous benefit. We've given out thousands of dollars in grants, but in the last couple of years, what we found was we really needed to specifically define a few terms. So the Secretary of Veterans Affairs and the Department of Veterans Affairs reached out to us, and last year we tried to correct this, but ran out of time between the Senate and the House. So here it is again, some pretty specific terms such as service dog. We just want to ensure that the money is going to meet our objective. It is going to the organizations this was designed to help, the ones that are most beneficial to the veterans we're trying to help. We have also been working with the Force Council, Department of Force Council. We try to define them a little more clearly. I think there's maybe some more changes to be made in the future just to include more of their groups. But for now, they're favorable with amendment on it. And I do know that Secretary Owens is favorable and is putting written testimony into the file. And for that, I asked for a favorable report, and I am open for any questions.
Thank you, Delegate. Are there questions from the committee? Seeing none, I guess you covered all the bases, Delegate.
That's why I love my home team.
Right. That concludes the hearing on HB 660. And we will go to the next bill. Another one of our own, Delegate Charles, House Bill 871. This is consolidation of the Procurement Improvement Council and the Council for the Procurement of Health, Educational, and Social Services. Delegate Charles.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As my good colleague before me already stated, it's always good to be in front of the home team. For the record, I am Delegate Nick Charles, and I am here to ask for a favorable report on House Bill 871. House Bill 871, as you heard, is the consolidation of Procurement Improvement Council and the Council of the Procurement of Health, Educational, and Social Services Councils. Over the summer, there was a work group pulled together by the Senate President's Office and also with our Speaker's Office to address some of these issues. I was not a part of this particular committee, but Delegate Krill Resnick was. And, you know, I was so happy that he brought this bill to my attention that I wanted to make sure I brought it in front of our committee. I think this is a very good bill that will address a lot of redundancy and streamline a lot of the efforts that the state of Maryland truly needs. When you look at the fact that we have the Procurement Improvement Council will consist of 12 members, and we also have the Council of Procurement of Health, Educational, Social Services consisting of 18 members, some of the members being the same people. In addition to them being some of the same people, they focus on the same exact issue, which is procurement and making sure accessibility is there. What we're doing with this bill is combining them all together so we have one particular group, one group. What this bill will do, it's going to alter the duties and the membership of the Procurement Improvement Council. It's going to streamline communications between the state units. And in addition to that, it'll repeal the Procurement of Health, Educational, Social Services Council, remove that, and allow everything to fall under the PIC, where the Chief Procurement Officer, who falls under DGS, will be the head. And this, which I think, especially as we're moving forward to try to make sure procurement is as inclusive as it should be, have everybody at the table. Currently, right now, you got folks, you know, in certain rooms talking about procurement, then folks in another room talking about procurement, but nobody's really talking together. So by bringing these two groups together, it's truly going to make an impact on the state and efficiencies. And I urge a favorable report. Thank you for hearing me on this particular piece of legislation. And I hope that we can get this passed and make some changes to the state procurement opportunities. Thank you.
Okay, questions from the committee? So I have a question, Delegate. What what have your conversations with the different procurement councils been like? And I see a written document that I haven't had a chance to look at, but just how have those discussions been, and what's the openness to?
Oh, no, it's very open. It's very open, Delegate Cullison. After speaking with Bob Gleason, who's the chair of the PIC, Bob Gleason, he is fully on board. After discussions I've had with him, they put forth a letter of information for everyone that is attached through our system. You'll be able to pull that and see. Right. And in addition to that, after talking with Senator Griffith, she was put on a committee this summer. And one of the things, this recommendation really came from the procurement of health, educational, social services. They wanted to streamline the efforts themselves because they were going to so many different meetings, and they wanted to try to pull this together to be more efficient with state resources and state time. Okay. So I think we're moving into the proper direction by pulling these two groups together, and I think we'll have more folks at the table so we can knock it out with one fell swoop versus constantly having multiple meetings going on all over the place.
Thank you, Delegate Charles. Chairman Pendergrass.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate Charles, do you know where the Senate bill is at this point?
I'm not sure. I have to talk to Senator Griffith, but it's Senate Bill 564. I believe the Senate bill will more than likely pass, being that the Senate.
I wondered in what form, if anything. So I just thought you might know. Thought you might have an update.
No, I don't have an update, but I do know that it's that they just had a hearing last week for the bill, so I know it'll be making some rounds fairly soon.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much, Delegate. This concludes hearing on House Bill 871. We will move to House Bill 874, Delegate Cox. This is Maryland Veterans Trust Fund, CAM for Veterans Grant Program, established David Perez Military Heroes Act, end 22 a day. Delegate Cox.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Madam Vice Chair and honorable members of the Health and Government Operations Committee. Delegate Cox, for the record, to really do something that is of great honor because of the name of the individual that I have the privilege of representing that's on this bill. David Perez was a friend of mine, and I'm going to get into that in a minute. But before I do that, I just want to start by saying that this is a simple program that allows veterans who are suffering PTSD or other traumatic disorders to have opportunities to reach outside of themselves and get help that the standard medical community may not always be able to provide. And this is a treatment that's called comparative and alternative medical treatment. So it could involve things that are varied so much as maybe a weekend away at a licensed retreat like Patriot Point over on the Eastern Shore of Maryland for veterans, or even a gym membership to allow that veteran to maintain their health. This is an opportunity to honor our veterans and to try to do something about the 22 veterans a day that the U.S. Veterans Affairs Department have said are suffering and dying by suicide in this country. It's a tragedy that we need to address. And David Perez was one of those guys who did that. Many of you might have met David here. He was actually here at the legislature serving as he did last year, and as he liked to do in various other capacities. He was also served some time working in the Capitol, United States Capitol. But I'm going to show you a picture, David, in case you might I don't know if you can see that with the camera, but David's the slightly shorter guy next to the taller Chris Peranto. And this is a photograph at my campaign launch event. David was kind enough to come to attend the launch of my own campaign for this House of Delegates seat. And if you'll notice here in the picture, he has a service dog. David was a fond lover of animals. And the truth about the Maryland Veterans Fund today is that veterans now can access service dogs. And unfortunately, though, that the veteran cannot use the same funds to possibly get their own exercise or to attend their own retreat that would provide that added benefit to their own health. So that's just simply what this does. It's a program that is now being recognized by the United States Veterans Affairs. The Veterans Affairs does not provide all of these potential options. They are expanding, but they don't provide all of the options that could be provided under this bill. Our combat veterans in Maryland are struggling. They're struggling with depression. They're struggling with stress. And unfortunately, the Baltimore Sun reported that in 2020, military suicides jumped as much as 20% over 2019. And that's just something that we need to address quickly and promptly with sending a message to the veteran community that we care about them and that we are going to do everything in our power as legislators to make sure that they're not forgotten. One of the things that David Perez did that was so honoring, I thought, was that he spent most of his time in politics and outside of politics for one goal, and that was to lift people up. I mean, everything from making sure people had food during the pandemic to making sure that veterans had homes. If you look at this picture again, the insignia on David's shirt here, I don't know, I can't show you clear enough, but he's wearing a shirt that says Building Veterans. And what he did was he was helping out in Frederick County in my district to provide housing for homeless veterans. It's just indicative of what a great man he was. We lost him too soon. And this bill will go a long way, I think, to both send a great message and also provide healing for our veterans. And I hope you've had a chance to see his mother's testimony in the record. And I hope you'll be able to hear from the other witnesses about the opportunity that this bill will provide our veterans. And I ask for a favorable report, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Delegate. I'd like to invite Laura Goodpaster to speak, please.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman. My name is Laura Goodpaster. David Perez was my son. I'm here today asking for a favorable vote for 74. And David was born and raised in Maryland. When he was 17, he joined the military. He served in the Army National Guard for 11 years. He was a combat vet, and after he served his country, he decided to dedicate his life to helping other veterans who served. David struggled with PTSD after his deployment in 2006. And in the fall of 2020, we lost David from the battles with his own challenges. Had this fund been available to him, I believe he still may be with us. As a military veteran myself, I have seen the result of veterans not having access to the therapies that might help them cope. That's why I support the bill to honor the work of David did and to keep his memory, dedication, and passion to this issue alive, as well as provide struggling veterans in our state with assistance to alternative forms of treatment for their time serving our country. Thank you.
Ms. Goodpaster, on behalf of the committee, we're very sorry for your loss, and thank you for your service and your son's service.
Thank you.
Mr. Patrick Gibao. Mr. Gibao? Is he here, Melissa?
So he is here. He needs to unmute.
Ah, okay. Mr. Gibao, you just need to unmute.
Okay,
There you go.
now I'm done once again.
Once again, good afternoon, Delegate Collison and distinguished members of the House Health and Government Committee. I'm Patrick Gabow, Legislative Chair for the American Legion Department of Maryland. A copy of our position has been presented to the committee, so please just allow me to hit the highlights. We strongly endorse House Bill 874 as a beacon of light for those enduring such illnesses as post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, along with the other mental traumas Delegate Cox mentioned. And these traumas are for those who served and suffered in our military, a majority in combat zones. The psychological disorders endured by these veterans have led to suicide, family upheaval, and homelessness, drug and alcohol addiction, and in some cases, crime and imprisonment. We feel the Maryland Veterans Trust Fund, administered by the Maryland Department of Veterans Affairs, is the ideal vehicle for managing this program and will assure the proper persons get the necessary treatment from qualified medical professionals. Now, on a personal note, I knew David from last year's session. He was a dedicated individual. He worked hard for veterans, and I found him to be a joyful person. I miss him, and I'm sure others who remember Dave do as well. Now, on another aspect, I'm familiar with CAM medications for having a stroke in 2005, so it was good. So in closing, American Legion asked for a favorable report, and we really thank Delegate Cox for his sponsoring of this individual measure, vital measure. Thank you, Delegate. Thank you, Delegate Cullen.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ike Puzon?
Yes. Good afternoon, members of the Health and Government Operations Committee. My name is Ike Puzon. I'm the Executive Director of the National War College Alumni Association and former co-chair of the Maryland Military Coalition. Throughout my post-active duty career, I've been deeply involved in veterans organizations representing hundreds of thousands of current and former service members and veterans, their families, and survivors in the state of Maryland and throughout the United States. As a board member, board president of an agency that provides care for disabled, I'm very familiar with all types of disabilities. I strongly support HB 874. Today's former and current military and their families endure enormous sacrifice to support their state and our nation. Maryland has approximately 390,000 veterans. As been stated in 2010, studies indicate as much as 20% of veterans have some form of post-traumatic stress disorder, with 22 veterans dying a day in 2010. That number is up significantly into 2020 to about 115 a day. Maryland veterans deserve our attention, our immediate action to address PTSD. The David Perez Military Heroes Act now not only honors military veterans, and most importantly, it will provide successful alternate forms of medicine and treatment. These are critical for individuals, as we do not know which complementary alternate medicine will be successful, but they are necessary for success. CAMs are extremely helpful and proven in all forms of disabilities. I urge the committee to favorably report HB 874. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Evan Young?
Good afternoon. My name is Evan Young. I was a friend of David Perez, and within moments of first meeting him, it was clear to me that he wanted his post-military life to be one of continued service, especially to his fellow veterans. Veterans are 1.5 times more likely to die by suicide than Americans who never served. Female veterans, the risk factor is 2.2 times more likely. Our combat veterans in Maryland are not immune to this. Many struggle with stress, depression, addiction, post-traumatic stress disorder from their time serving us as we sat safe and secure here at home. Last year, David's own struggles ultimately took him from the world he sought to make better at just 34 years old. David's story is tragic, but his journey is, as we know, not unheard of. Maryland can help create a different story for those who will come after. Continuing to rely on treatments that we always have, the way we always have, will result in more tragic stories like David's. If that were not true, we wouldn't have this issue to talk about today. Our current course of action and the spectrum of treatment and therapeutic options easily available to these men and women would be sufficient. This plight of our veterans would not exist. Accessible, complementary, and alternative treatment options will enrich and save lives, expanding choices to veterans without escalating their financial burden. Every day without is a day knowing we are not doing everything we could for these men and women. Though David's death is final, if it's the catalyst to act, to improve, and to help save the lives of those to come after him, I'm confident that David Perez I knew would say that those lives saved as a result of this bill were worth what he had to endure. So thank you for your time and a favorable report on HB 874.
Thank you. And Dave Bishop. Mr. Bishop.
You should be in the room.
Okay, Mr. Bishop, perhaps you're on mute. David Bishop. Okay, I'm going to ask again. Mr. David Bishop. I see he's connecting. Looks like he's connecting to audio. Okay. While we're waiting for Mr. Bishop, we'll give him a chance to speak once he's able to connect. We'll go to questions from the committee. Delegate Kerr.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Delegate Cox, thank you for the bill, and Colonel, thank you for your testimony. David Perez was a student of mine at Frederick Community College.
Thank you, Delegate.
I too considered him a friend. The last time I saw David, he helped me to procure some PPE for the healthcare staff at a long-term care facility in my district. And we were all shocked and saddened to hear of David's passing. But my question is, can you speak, someone on the panel or perhaps yourself, Delegate, to what this program's modeled after and any information on the type of success that people have seen from this and similar programs?
Well, thank you, Delegate. I'll start, and then if someone from the panel can add to it, that would be helpful. But I know that this is a rather new approach. It's looking at alternative treatments, and the department, the Veterans Administration has not had enough time, I think, from what I've read, to do actual studies to see the full impact. But one of the things that has been noted is it has seemed to have an immediate benefit with some veterans. Things like acupuncture to just spending time at a licensed retreat and things like that can build up both the veteran and maybe even their family. So these are programs and medical treatments that are not normally part of the medical system and even the mental health care systems. So, but they're certainly complementary, and they're not detracting from those resources. They're just providing a vehicle for that. And I don't know if
So Delegate,
panelists, our committee rules only allow one response. Thank you, Delegate.
Yeah. And if there's someone else who
okay,
further,
they
can.
Thank you.
Delegate Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate Cox, for bringing this bill, and to those of you for your service, and to Mr. Perez's mother for, again, her service and her loss. So the complementary, as you said, complementary and alternative medications actually are becoming very well established in helping people with behavioral health issues and other things, including things like cancer and stuff. So they're very acceptable. What my question is, the current law says that the fund can be used for any other programs that the trust considers to be within the purpose for which the trust is established. So as it is now, the trust could choose to spend money for these complementary and alternative medical programs. So why is this bill needed for them to do that?
Well, that's a great question, Delegate, and I've had extensive discussions with our great Secretary Owings about this issue. And as the law is structured, they don't view the interpretation apparently of the law currently as written as giving them much additional authority for a lot of these programs. So they simply tend to refer, if I've understood this correctly, they tend to refer over to the Veterans Administration for alternative treatment. So they focus, this fund, they tend to focus on sending to third-party payments, for instance, like BG&E or other bill payers that they need to supplement, that a veteran asks them to help them supplement, and they qualify under the act. So this would not only be authorizing, enabling, but it would also, I believe, as you pointed out, be more clarifying.
Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, panel. Whoever's best suited to answer the question, well, actually, it's going to be directed at Delegate Cox first. Have you seen a letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs?
Yes, Delegate Johnson, I have.
Can you elaborate a little bit to us on some of the concerns they have as far as the limited success evidence about the efficiency of CAM? And they also state the VA is best suited to provide these treatments and has the capacity to not only provide the treatment, but to cover the cost. And it's unknown the degree to which CAM treatment provides understanding of military culture, known suicide risk, and best practices and resources available to refer a veteran should they screen positive for a risk. Can you just go over that a little bit with us?
Certainly, and I thank you for the opportunity. So the Secretary made it pretty clear that he was supportive of the concept. The practical aspect of how to implement was what we had a lengthy discussion about. And his statement was that they were not opposed. So it was a letter of information is how it was told to us. And the specific areas of concern that I've tried to address in an amendment that we've put in are three particular areas. They were concerned about capping the amount of money per applicant per instance. So the Secretary suggested $1,000 a person because that's what they do currently in the equine program, I believe. So we put that amendment request in. Also, he was concerned that their one employee in this program would need some guidance on writing regulations. So I've put an amendment in to allow for the coordination between the Secretary of Health and the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. That way they'll have guidance. They won't just be trying to invent these rules. They'll have some specific guidelines for how to authorize these payments. And then finally, specifically, they were not sure about whether to pay for, somebody that's, legitimate or possibly, trying to prevent scams, which is very, very unlikely, but it was something that came up. So we put some language in that would say that if the comparative and alternative treatment program is licensed and state recognized, that would be a procedure to use that would verify that this is a legitimate program and not something that's not state recognized. As to the VA issue, that was an ancillary discussion that one of his department commanders or leaders brought up, that in that particular person's view, they thought all mental health issues would be better handled by the Veterans Administration of the United States. And we had a discussion about that, and they actually were not opposed to our idea at all, but it just, I think their concern was making sure that the individuals would have some help in knowing how to administer this so that they wouldn't be in the dark.
So you do have amendments in for those 3 issues?
I do, yes.
All right. Thank you,
And you'll see
Delegate.
those. I think Delegate Pat Young is going to review that with myself and possibly the Senate and make sure that that's done the way the Secretary would be content.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Delegate. I think Mr. Bishop is now available to us, perhaps by audio only. Dave Bishop, would you like to present your testimony? Mr. Bishop. And perhaps it's not working yet. This is one of the struggles with our new technology. I appreciate your patience and Mr. Bishop's persistence, but it looks like we are not going to be able to hear him on this bill. Yeah. I appreciate your attempt, but I think now we are going to complete the work on this bill. I want to thank Delegate Cox for bringing it to us. Thank the witnesses for their time and testimony. So this completes the hearing on HB 874 and the work before the committee today. We will meet again tomorrow in hearings at 1:30. Thank you all. Have a good evening and